Hi, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Creative Mountain Mama podcast. I am joined by Anna Panza of our Faith-Filled Home. She talks a little bit about homemaking, home management, and homeschool. Thank you for joining me, Anna.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
What's new?
There's not a whole lot I feel like every day is new. Like there's always something that's going on in your world and it just changes every single day. So I am very fortunate to get to experience life with my little ones, and it just every day is different.
Do you have any funny stories? Kids seem to be a limitless supply.
Like it keeps going. And I thought when something happened, I'm like, oh, this is so perfect to share with everybody. I'm a mom of 3 boys. My oldest is 6, my youngest is 8 months old, and I have a 2.5-year-old that's in the middle there, and sometimes he gets a little rogue. And we have this like little joke in our family that we started with my 6-year-old when he started to learn life counting. So my 2.5-year-old is counting the other day, and it's like 1, 2, he gets to 10, and he's like 21, 23, 32, ready or not, here I come. And like I always say, when things they don't come out of them as you would hope, like when other people are like, oh, so far homeschooling is going great, like you just have to like laugh off like the imperfections, because we've learned that over time they do catch on to put 11 after 10. And it was one of those like, all right, we're here again, it's going well, I guess.
That's awesome. Counting will come in the right sequence.
Eventually. My 6-year-old put 8 between 12 and 13 for the longest time, and it was actually something I was like, I hope you never get rid of this. Like I know you have to eventually. And it was kind of sad the first time that he counted from 12 to 13, because it lost like that innocence about it. The 8
Yep.
wasn't there anymore, but I get to experience now again.
Ours was Gagok for Cookie. Gagok went
Okay.
away and Cookie was
Oh.
replaced, and I said, no.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you want them to grow up, and you want them to learn. You want them to be able to function, not be a 45-year-old that counts with an 8 between 12 and 13. But also it's kind of like a bittersweet moment where you're like, all right, we're doing this, we're growing up, we're changing.
I hear you. On the homeschool side, can you tell me a little bit about the rhythm of your day?
Every day is different. That's actually the beauty of homeschooling, because we get the flexibility. So most likely I like to have a slower morning. There is one day a week where we do have to leave pretty like around 8 o'clock in the morning, and that day is not our example day. But for the most part, we wake up, we will have breakfast together, we will make breakfast. I'm very lucky and fortunate that we have instilled my 6-year-old, his habit is to empty the dishwasher. So I'll cook breakfast, he'll empty the dishwasher, we'll work together, have little conversations about our day. We have breakfast, and at that time, our breakfast is blessed with either a devotional or a scripture verse that we're memorizing. So it's more of like a biblical time, foundational scriptural time. And then we go into getting ready for the day, looking at our schedule. Usually that looks like we will get dressed, we will take a walk together as a little family unit, and then we'll come back and do some learning time. Looks a little different for my 2.5-year-old than it does for my 6-year-old, but he participates. The baby, if he's awake, I'll put him in his high chair with something special for that day. And then after we do a little bit of learning, then we just play. We have lunch. Every once in a while, we'll have a scheduled activity that starts in the early afternoon with some friends, or we'll have friends over, and then we just wait until family dinner, feels like.
Does that change seasonally?
We're in Southern California, so I don't feel like it changes very much, because we don't have a lot of the weather pattern changes that I think
Sure.
there are in, like, we're very fortunate that it doesn't snow where we are. So our biggest hurdle of getting outside for that walk is rain, usually, or wind. We live in a very windy area. And so even if it's cold outside, we'll still go for a walk. We will still try to keep this rhythm. I also don't change my homeschool pattern very much for summer. I know some families will take the season of summer completely off from academics, and it's like that homeschool, we're off for the summer. I don't find that that works well for us, for myself. But my 6-year-old, since he was 2.5, when my son was 2, we had COVID. It was 2020, and everything about our pattern shifted and changed. And we ended up in our day I would get to the end of my day and I was like, what did I do today with my 2-year-old? And we watched a lot of TV. It disrupted our home. It disrupted dynamics. Everybody's life was kind of turned upside down in that time. But I realized that if I got really intentional about doing activities with him, pairing a book with a coloring sheet at that time, sitting down, reading a Bible story, doing an art project, he's actually just grown from 2 and doing this time together in the morning. He's now 6. And I just don't like to disrupt things if they're working well. So we might have a little bit of off time when we go like camping or to the beach, but it doesn't mean that I'll stop the time at the table with breakfast. We'll just kind of keep that pattern going.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started and what that shift was like?
I I was never the mom that thought that I was going to homeschool. In fact, when we were starting the process as a married couple of looking for a home, you looked at the school district around you, and yeah, I thought if I was going to homeschool, I was going to need a homeschool room or a loft area where, and it, like the vision at that time was like, if I was going to do that, then I needed the bulletin boards with the funny little like scalloped edge around that like we had when we went to school. And it was by an experience. When my son was 4 months old, I joined a mom's group. I felt like at the time I didn't really have any friends that related to the thought pattern and the thought process that we were having as a family in regards to a lot of things. Now that we had this child, we had some experiences before I had him that led us down this difficult path. The Lord used these struggles to refine us and draw us closer to him, because that's what he does. He takes times of need and then he actually uses it as time to draw closer to him. And I joined a group called Holistic Moms. They're all over the country. They have different chapters. And I got around these women and I was mainly looking for like bubble bath. Like, what do you wash your baby in that's not toxic? And what do you eat? And where do you get your eggs? And what I saw was these women homeschooling, but I saw their older children. And what I loved about their older children was that they were engaged. They were not in a phone. They were either interacting with the younger kids. They were respectful. They were holding a conversation with me as an adult, and they were in middle school. And it was a respectful conversation. It wasn't like I was having to come down into like a methodical land to like communicate with them. We were actually communicating about real things. And that sparked me into looking at homeschooling from a different lens. I was still on the fence, but what I learned from a couple that had homeschooled their children, they had 3 adult children now, and they came and I learned from them in this talk, and they were talking about interest-led learning, which is still something that I believe in wholeheartedly. And basically what that is you take what a child is interested in. In their case, their daughter loved airplanes, and the way that the airplane, she wanted to be a pilot. In my case right now, I'm going to use the example of my son. My 6-year-old loves race cars, and he can memorize, and race cars are his thing, right? And they talked about how they would teach their daughter math through the airplanes. They would teach her science. They would teach her all of these things based on what she loved and what they experienced. Because she loved airplanes, what they ended up experiencing was they didn't have the struggles. So I don't know how you grew up, but when I grew up in school, it was a struggle for me to be there. I didn't feel like I always wanted to do something very creative. I wanted to go to cosmetology school, and I was met with resistance when I got to that point in high school. I didn't want to do all of the academic-y things. I wanted to use that time to do like cosmetology, and that's what I loved. And it kind of got stifled and pushed down because that wasn't, whatever the term was, realistic, or it was hard for, I think it's hard for people to really see, like when someone wants to be creative, we are taught culturally like that's kind of dreamy. but then you realize when you get older, you look back and you're like, wow, I really would love to do something that I love. That's what interest-led learning is, but it starts it at such an early age. And once I heard that, there is no really, you can't convince me otherwise, just because I see the fruit of it already. And my son, I haven't experienced any resistance to learning because we just follow his lead. He wanted to learn how to read specifically so he could read like the reader boards in different things or races. He wanted to learn how to read, so that's what we started to do. And it has not been met with any like I would have done if I was drugged through something. And there are other things that led me there. I have any resistance to like the public school, like a classroom day. And I read some books that guided me through like what a public school classroom looks like, how it got that way, how our academics came about. And that shifted me too. So it's kind of like, it's multifaceted what got me there, but those are the main things that drove me to be here.
And it sounds like you've done your research. You share your story. How have you seen that touch other people's lives?
I call it like my hill. Like, this is the thing. I could talk about this for hours because I'm so passionate about it. So it's almost like my little hill that I'll stand on. And I am not naive. I know that homeschooling for multiple reasons is not for everyone. That sometimes I'm met with, but I also think that we have a lot of hesitations as a culture that are really just misunderstood things. And it has, the resistance sometimes can be, I don't want my kid to be, and I can easily just like kind of justify all of these. I don't want my kid to be weird and not socialized, or how, as a stay-at-home mom, how do I keep my home in a certain place when I have my kids there 24/7? There's this idea culturally that they go somewhere and that's when you do all of your life and then you go pick them up, right? And there's a hesitation that you won't have, there's a hesitation that you're going to lose out or miss out on time with yourself or time to think for yourself, or if I'm at home for 6 hours, because we view it, whenever I've met resistance and I start to ask questions, what do you think a homeschool day looks like? Because it does not look like a 7 a.m. or an 8 a.m. to a 2:30 p.m. It actually looks more like an hour and a half. A homeschooling day, because when you think about it, I don't have the interruption. I have interruptions. I have a 9-month-old or 8-month-old and a 2.5-year-old, but I don't have the same interruptions, right? And when you think about how a child in a classroom has to transition from subject to subject, right? We're taking 20 to 30 kids and transitions are hard. Transitions are hard for adults. Transitions are hard for children. And we take these 20 to 30 children and we transition them from math, and then we tell them to click it off, and now we're going into science. And there is disruption because a human brain cannot just toggle through in that manner smoothly 100% of the time. So you have 20 to 30, let's just say 25 kids that you're trying to get them to transition over. Of course there's disruption. Of course there's struggle. There's children that learn differently. So now I have a teacher that is teaching in 10 different learning styles and patterns. So the day does not look like a 6-hour school day. Life is also school. So we learn from a book for reading because I needed the help as a mom, and I needed someone that went before me that knew how to teach a child's brain how to read. So I got the reading curriculum. But a normal day could look like math by baking, fractions, counting. Make sure you put 3 eggs, because if you put 4 eggs, that's why we have to learn what comes after 10, because 21 doesn't come after 10. You can't put 21 eggs, you have to do 11 eggs. So I do want my children to learn how to do all of these things, but I've learned that I can teach them in life when we go somewhere, when we're communicating. And then the socialization thing, I always think is so interesting. And when I went to school, I was in a classroom with I was 6 and I was in a classroom with 6 to 7-year-olds. And then I went into high school and I was in a classroom with 15 to 16-year-olds. And then I got into college and I was with adults who had grandchildren, right? So I went through K to 12 with peers my own age. And then I got kicked into life and I had to go into the workplace. I worked at Applebee's as a server, and I had to communicate with adults. I had to communicate with adults that were my peers, that were at my tables, that my management system, because those people weren't 18 or 19 years old. So I had to learn really quickly how to function in the world. And I feel like it's the only time in life for 13 years where we expect a human to only communicate and socialize with their own age group. But also, I just find it really interesting that we have this belief system still, and that's still a hesitation, or like the resistance, or what I met with sometimes, like, well, how do they socialize? Their calendar I have to keep their calendar in a way that serves our family, because we could easily have socialization opportunities that would just blow us out of the water, because there's so much abundance in the opportunity to socialize. But what we call it as a family is play with children of all ages, at the park, at the museum, at the amusement park, because our schedule now has this flexibility where if my son was in class, he gets an allotted 30 minutes for recess, maybe, if he didn't act out in class, because sometimes we'll take that away from children, right? Or then he gets a lunch break, and then he would get a small period after school, maybe while he's waiting for someone to pick him up, to socialize and play. I don't find that socialization. I find, and maybe I'm biased because I've experienced it for almost 6 years. My son entered into homeschooling groups when he was 18 months old, and I started to build community with families at that time. I haven't seen him just sit and wait for friends to come over, or like, we don't just sit in our house all day. We go out and we experience, and we're social. So that, I always find like that, if someone were to say that to me now, they need like 20 minutes for me to give them my answer back. But because I will just explain it just like that. It just doesn't, socialization, I just feel like doesn't even have any, like, it's not even valid anymore, especially when we're looking at what school is now and the shift that happened from 2020 to where we're currently at. It's totally different.
Can you dive a little deeper into your reference to your background studying public school, how that came about, a little bit of the history? Is that something you can share?
So I found this book. It was recommended to me by this couple that I spoke about earlier, that I went to the talk, and they gave their hearts of how they raised their 3 children. And it's called Dumbing Us Down by John Gatto. The book is about this big, and it is such an easy read. I would say that sometimes you run across a homeschooling book, and to kind of comprehend it, you're just like, this is so boring. But basically what he does is he walks through in this book, and it's the thing that really shifted, because when I started to look at homeschooling, I had fear, I had hesitation. What was my mom going to think? What was my dad going to think? What was my grandma going to think? What kind of conversations were going to happen at the dinner table? How was I going to protect my kids? And so I read this book, and he basically walks through how the public school system was kind of established over time. Over time, we created these little classrooms, we created a curriculum, we created an agenda gets thrown around in our world. So we created a systematic way for children to learn. And the reason for that was so that they would exit the school system and kind of fall in line. Really, like, that's how I was raised. I was raised in a public school system. And when I got out, I thought I had to go to college. I took on student loans to go to college. I referenced earlier that drive and that passion inside of me to be creative and create was stifled. So I basically took out student loans to follow the course, because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And it left me with student loan debt. And unfortunately, it left me with a degree that didn't match my passion. Like, I look back at it now, and like, obviously you need experience in life to learn. That's why God gives them to us. But I still tell my husband to this day, I will go and do and pursue that. So when we go through school by this way of life, this creation, we're just all kind of falling in place. The bell rings, we line up, we go in, and we sit down. And when you don't sit down and you are a child you're a child that wants to go play and burn some energy. I don't know how we sometimes will label it ADHD, and I'm just like, no, they're just children and sitting at a desk. Adults don't do that. When I worked in an office, I had to get up from my desk to walk around the office mindlessly to break. I just couldn't sit there all day. And we expect these little children to sit in a desk, but we're training them up, and we're training them to sit there. And if they don't sit there and they aren't quiet and they do use their limbs in wild ways in this 10 by 10 little prison cell that they get, then we call them bad, or we send them off, or we take away the recess. This is what drives me crazy when I hear like they got their recess taken away. I'm like, oh my gosh, they really need that. Like, that is not discipline. That is just taking away what they need. They need to go obviously burn some energy. And I don't know, I don't think, observing my son, like, I am so grateful that someone is not forcing you to sit at a table, because that's just not you, you know? So the book is Dumbing Us Down by John Gatto. And I think if you're on the fence and you're not really sure, you need just some more, like, not convincing, but you feel like you need to learn something so that when you're challenged, you have this response. That is an excellent place to start.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking back to where you started, is there anything you would do differently knowing what you know now?
I don't say this from like a ego place, but I am very happy with where we are ending up. And I always joke, like, I might wake up one day and my 6-year-old might just totally throw me off and blow my theory all the way up. Hasn't happened yet. I'm still banking that it won't, because I have the research and the knowledge, and now I know how this is working. But something that I think I wish I would have started sooner was foundationally laying more biblical scripture and life in him. That took me a little bit of realizing a shift. And what I mean by that is I got caught up in thinking that academics were priority, and I got scared. I got fearful of what would happen if he fell behind. And I hear that often as well from other families. And I'm grateful that the Lord took me and helped me work through that, because now the way that I see it is there's no falling behind, because the main thing for me now is making sure that my kids have a biblical foundation first. That is most important. And I discovered my 6-year-old, I have 3 sons. So my 6-year-old had this incredible ability. After a race one time, he memorized the driver number, the place of the driver in that particular race of like 27 cars. And he did it because he was passionate about it, one. But what it made me realize was that I was underestimating how much he could memorize scripture. So what I did was like, all right, let's see if we can memorize John 3:16 together. And he was 3.5, I think, 3 years old. And we memorized it line by line together. And he holds that in his heart, and he holds that as a foundation that now he can walk into life, and he can pray it, he can say it, he knows it. And over time, we've done many others. We're working on Galatians 6:9 right now. And my 2.5-year-old can, not perfectly, but given the correct, like helping him guide along, he knows Galatians 6:9, and he's 2.5 years old. And I think sometimes we are leaning on, as Christian mothers, we kind of sometimes think, okay, we only have so much time in the day. How do I fit all of this in, right? Like, you kind of, and distractions of phones and the world and all of these things. And so we think that Sunday, whether you have a children's ministry or we're sending them into worship service with us, and we're hoping that they're gathering all of these things, we hope that's enough. And I just don't think it is. We come from a church that has an incredible children's ministry, children's team. And I feel like I would be leaving so much opportunity on the table for them kingdom wise, because that's what I'm raising. I'm raising children to be disciples, to be kingdom movers, to go out into the world and move for God's kingdom. That's my job. I believe that. And so if I just left it up to my children's pastor on a Sunday and didn't incorporate it into our lifestyle during the week, I don't feel like it would be sticking. And I just see, because of the fruit of going through it consistently with them, I don't drive home scripture and then we don't sit there like a chalkboard and be all crazy. Like we did in the car today, driving them to Grandma and Grandpa's. We went through Galatians 6:9 together. And I'll tell you, as a mom, I didn't grow up memorizing scripture, so I'm not the first one that can belt it out for you, but I'm learning it alongside my children. And so now when we need that little bit of a reminder, I can help them and help myself pull from scripture to center us. Like Galatians 6:9 is, let us not grow weary of doing good, for in the right time we will reap, right? So I can use that to remind my son, or to remind myself on the hard days, hey, like God shows us in his word that if we keep going, we will reap a benefit. It may not feel like it right now, but then to be able to link them back to scripture is my job. And then ABC's 1, 2, 3's reading comes after. I also think it's interesting, like reading is not the primary thing, but if like he wants to read the scripture himself, then I'm like all for it. And so we do a lot of reading out of children's, there's like easy reader Bibles that go through different accounts in a way that he can now read it for himself, because I can tell him, I can show him, but if I teach him how to do it, he's going to retain it a lot better and longer.
Raise up your children in the way they should go, and they will never depart from it. Thank you so much, Anna.